Starting in John chapter 3 this morning, a brand new chapter. We're going to talk about Jesus as being the teacher from God. And in preparing for this sermon, I must have encountered, if 100, I must have thought of 500 teacher jokes. Teacher jokes, student teacher jokes, but they all sounded like dad puns in my head. And so I'm going to try really hard this morning not to say a single teacher joke. We'll see if I'm successful. Because when we get into John chapter 3, we have this moment between Nicodemus and Jesus. And it starts off with Nicodemus talking about how great of a teacher Jesus is. And so we're going to look at John chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, leaving all the teacher jokes out. And we're going to look at Jesus, the teacher from God. Let's read this passage, these two verses. John chapter 3, verses 1 and 2 says this, my friends. Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. And this man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you have come from God as a teacher, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. 2 verses. Nicodemus, Jesus, and teaching. Let me break this down to a single sentence, and we'll come back to the single sentence over and over again. The sermon in the sentence says this: meeting with Nicodemus, Rabbi Jesus is the perfect example of a teacher, and we are also teachers by word and example. John chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. So I want to talk about Nicodemus, Jesus, and then us. Nicodemus, Jesus, and us. So let's start off with Nicodemus. I haven't run into too many people named Nicodemus. I mean, it's kind of a mouthful, Nicodemus. I suppose if there was a Nicodemus around now, we would call him Nick. Nick. So let me just, save my own breath and talk about Nick. And every time I say Nick, you think Nicodemus, and don't try to spell it. I don't know how to spell Nicodemus. Nicodemus is found in 3 different passages. So Nick is around in John chapter 3, John 7, and John 19. And he shows up in John chapter 3, and it makes a big deal that he showed up at night. Now, it gives some credentials in verse 1 for Nick. Nick's got some credentials. He's got some credibility. He's got some responsibilities, and they are substantial. And that's why it lists these in verse 1. Nick is a Pharisee. Now, when we think of Pharisees, we tend to think of Paul, the Apostle Paul. He makes a big deal that he's a Pharisee of Pharisees. But here we have Nick being the first declared Pharisee by name in the Gospel of John. And being a Pharisee is a huge deal. Being a Pharisee meant that you were a separated one, that you were a teacher of the law. Those 2 things. You're a separated one. That's what Pharisee means, is someone that is set apart, that has been separated. Pharisee, separated one, a set apart one. And you're also a teacher of the law. Now, every community that could get 10 Jewish men together, 10 Jewish men, they could form a synagogue, and a synagogue would have a leader. And the leader of the synagogue in Jesus' day would be a Pharisee. So a Pharisee is kind of like the pastor, preacher, high school principal, mayor of the town for every 10 Jewish men. But not only is Nick a Pharisee, therefore he's a separated one, and he's a teacher of the law. He would have had the entire Old Testament memorized, verbatim, word from word, from Genesis to Malachi. Now that's strong memory. He's a teacher of the law. But he's not only a teacher of the law, he is also one of the rulers. Now, what in the world does that mean? Is he a guy with a tape measure? That was not a teacher joke, right? Yeah, that was a shop joke. Maybe it was a teacher joke. Oh, no. He's a ruler. And what does that mean? That means that he's a member of the Sanhedrin. Now, there's a complicated word. The Sanhedrin was the Jewish Supreme Court. The Jewish Supreme Court was made up of 70 guys. They met in Jerusalem, and they pretty much ran the country under the authority of the occupying Romans. So he's not only a Pharisee, a separated one, a teacher of the law, but he's also a member of the Sanhedrin. He's a member of the Jewish Supreme Court. In other words, his main job is in Washington, D.C. He's got some significant credentials. Now, every time he gets named in all three of these passages, it mentions he comes at night. He's the guy who bothered Jesus at night. It'll say that in John 7. It'll say that in John 19. He's the guy who bothered Jesus at night. And a lot of Bible scholars and Bible readers, a lot of preachers, come to the conclusion that it emphasizes the fact that Jesus is bothered by Nicodemus at night because Nicodemus was a secret Jesus follower. That he came to Jesus at night because he was embarrassed by his faith. I can see where they come to that. I get that. Nowhere in the text does it ever say that. Now, if he's a Pharisee, he's a set-apart one, he's a teacher of the law, he's got a full-time job in Washington, D.C., and he shows up to ask Jesus questions, he can't really do that during the day. I think, contrary to popular opinion, that this is not an expression of Nicodemus being a secret believer, that he's embarrassed about Jesus. I think he comes to Jesus in the middle of the night because that was Nick's free time. He fulfilled his 10, 15-hour workday in Jerusalem. He had to travel to wherever Jesus is at in order to ask Jesus questions. And then what does he have to do? He has to go back. So rather than an expression of shame, he's some kind of secret believer, I think this is an expression of sacrifice. He is so interested in the truth that Jesus has to present that he travels to be able to share just a moment with him in the middle of the night and then have to travel back. I may be wrong. It's a minority opinion. But I give Nick the benefit of the doubt. So in chapter 3, what we have, and we will see this for several weeks, if not months, if not years, through John chapter 3, Jesus and Nicodemus have an interesting conversation. Nick asks a question, and Jesus doesn't answer it. Nick asks a follow-up question, and Jesus doesn't answer it. And the reason Nick comes to Jesus in John chapter 3 is because he is seeking knowledge and truth from the master teacher. This is one teacher of the law, going to Jesus, the master teacher, and seeking knowledge and truth. And that warms my heart. Because this tells me that Nick was a lifelong learner. That he was teachable, even though he was at the apex of his career as a teacher and as a ruler. He was teachable. He wanted to know. He wanted to grow. He wanted to receive more divine truth. And so he travels after his long day to do this. That's beautiful. I want to be like Nick. I want to be a lifelong learner. I want to pursue divine truth, even if it costs me staying up past 9 o'clock and I fall asleep at 9 o'clock regardless of where I'm at. Let us be seekers of truth, my friend. The second time Nick is mentioned is in John chapter 7, and he's mentioned again as Nicodemus, the guy who bothered Jesus at night. But in John chapter 7, verses 50 and 51, Nick is doing his full-time job. He's at the Sanhedrin. He's at the Jewish Supreme Court. He's sitting in his seat in Jerusalem. And they are debating what to do with Jesus. And if Nick was a silent, secret believer, you would think Nick would be quiet. But what he does in verse 50 and 51 of John chapter 7 is he speaks up and he says it is not legal to condemn a man without him being able to testify for himself. You cannot judge him in his absence. He quotes Exodus. He's a teacher of the law and he presents law to the Jewish Supreme Court. And they go, okay. Surely nothing good comes out of Galilee. You know, they reply with a sarcastic, snarky comment, talking bad about Jesus. So here Nick is confronted with conversation about Jesus, and he steps forward and he presents law and justice. I really bad want to say law and order. Dun, dun, dun. If I accidentally say law and order, I mean law and justice. Dun, dun, dun. It'll be all right. So he stands up and he makes a case for law and, I almost did it, law and justice. Whew. We need to be people following after God who are just in their own lives and fight for justice for others. Again, I want to be like Nick. He's an example to me. That speaks volumes into my life. Let you and I be people that are just to the people around us, but also fight for justice, especially for those falsely accused like Jesus, those outsiders, outliers, downcast, the people who aren't represented. Let you and I represent. Nick spoke up. And then, of course, John chapter 19, the third time Nick is mentioned. Nick, who came to Jesus at night. This, John chapter 19, verses 39 through 42, is Jesus has died on the cross. And his body is still hanging there. And we remember Joseph of Arimathea, right? That name rings a bell for you. Joseph of Arimathea goes to Pilate, gets permission, gives up his own tomb. That's verse 38, Joseph of Arimathea. Verse 39 mentions Nick is there too. And so Nick is involved in taking the body of Jesus down off the cross. Nick is involved in taking the body to the tomb. Nick is involved in presenting the spices that are given to the corpse to cover up the smell and the decay. That's what verse 39 through 42 is talking about. This is not a secret believer. They just killed him, and Nick steps up in public. And one of the most powerful things in this is Nick provides 100 pounds of these spices. And it actually says the amount, 100 pounds of these spices, which is 10 times more than what is needed. So here you have a great generosity. You only need 10, Nick brings 100. You only ask for $1, he brings 10. But not only that, but trying to compute the expense will blow your mind. He brought somewhere between $1 and $3 million worth of spices. Depending on how you value it all, he dumped a load of cash on Jesus' funeral. So here you have Nick, not only seeking truth and knowledge, not only standing up for justice, but here you have him being generous and sacrificial to a corpse. Again, that hits me. I want to be this guy. I want to be sacrificial and generous. I want to overwhelm when there's a need. You only need 10 pounds. He brought 100. In many ways, Nick is an example for us. An example we don't live up to. An example I don't live up to. Way to go, Nick. How are you like Nicodemus? And how are you not? Are you passionate and known for your pursuit of truth, justice, and the American way? Truth, justice, and generosity. There you go. See, I didn't make a Law and Order joke there. Ooh, I did it again. See, yeah. This is the challenge of Nicodemus and his credibility.